Cracking the code of autism. Two large new studies identify more than 100 genes involved in autism spectrum disorders. Now, scientists are calling these findings a major turning point in understanding how mutations disrupt nerve networks in the brain. Our Dr. David Agus is in Fort Lauderdale, Florida this morning. Good to see you, Dr. Agus, in Florida this time. So tell us why this is such a big deal to the researchers and certainly for the families who are living with autism.
So there have been several studies done with small numbers of samples. In these, dozens of labs across the world got together and combined their samples. And with newer genetic technologies, they were able to identify dozens of genes that are associated with autism, and then hundreds more that are probably associated. So we're now getting to learn the map. And while that may sound very complicated, they all converge on three functions within the brain.
And David Agus, I thought that was really interesting about this study is that through genomic sequencing that many of these mutations are de novo, meaning they're not coming from their parents, they happen right before conception, right?
Yeah, so there are two buckets, if you will. Some come from the mother and father, and a big fraction are de novo. They happen either in the sperm or the egg before they come together, and so they're new. And as we get to understand what they do and how they work, the hope is we can then use them to identify early what's going on in autism in a child and lead to treatments.
So to be clear, so there are some genetic causes of autism, and these other ones may be environmental.
Yeah, so we know in autism there's genetic causes and they're environmental. Remember, environment doesn't just mean the outside environment. It means anything non-genetic. And so they're two separate, they come together, and they're a perfect storm. Happens a lot more in boys than girls. And what we learned from this study, which is really interesting, is that the genetics of autism in boys and girls who are low functioning, low IQ is different from boys where it predominantly is high functioning, high IQ.
Is autism on the rise?
It clearly is when you look at the numbers on the rise over the last couple of decades. This study doesn't really address that because we're looking in one moment in time. They didn't go back and look at the samples from decades ago to try to understand that reason there's a change, but something is clearly happening.
Well, how will this help us find a new treatment or a test for families?
Well, right now, today, this data can be used very shortly to actually diagnose children early and start behavioral treatments. But by converging on these three mechanisms, the hope is we can now develop drugs to target these mechanisms. And if you're a child with autism, we can put you in a particular bucket with that mechanism and hopefully give you the right drug to change the course of the disease and make a major impact in your life and your family's life.
These are some big studies. Thank you so much, Dr. David Agus.